Welcome, everyone. I'm Justin Paperny. Thank you so much for giving me your attention today. To our existing subscribers, thanks for coming back. And to those of you who are new, I hope you find value in this content. And if you do find value in it, consider sharing it with those who may find value in it. Today, I want to touch on the biggest challenge to overcome at a federal sentencing. Now, I understand as a defendant, there are so many challenges to overcome: properly conveying your remorse, expressing your contrition, demonstrating lessons learned, and so on. But with respect to obtaining the shortest sentence and conveying to a judge why you're worthy of the shortest sentence, I want to touch on the biggest challenge to overcome as the defendant. And then, of course, offer a practical takeaway and tip for those of you who have yet to be sentenced, so you can try to reduce the sentence to ensure that you've done all you can to prepare. So I wanted to film this video because a few days ago I received a call from a physician, and this doctor received a sentence of 8 years in prison. And it was a very long sentence. And even though the government asked for, I think, more than 10 years, nearly 11 years, and his lawyers were asking for less than 3, the judge still gave him 8 years. And as you would imagine, getting sentenced to 8 years in prison as a first-time nonviolent offender is devastating. And for him, for his family, of course, victims in the courtroom were jumping for joy. But 8 years was more than he was expecting. Lawyers could have done a better job, I think, managing his expectations. Heading into a sentencing hearing, you should work under the idea, you should prepare for the worst case scenario. So anything beneath that really is a blessing. And mistakenly, he was expecting this 3 or 4 years, not the 8, 9, 10, or 11 the government was seeking. So here we are, we get 8 years, he calls, we're speaking, and he said, I just don't understand how I could get 8 years. I am a nonviolent first-time offender. This physician sent me some of his sentencing preparations, and they were excellent. The character reference letters were excellent. The narrative was pretty good, more excuses, justifications than I'd like to see. Kind of playing both sides while writing this narrative, as I like to say, having your cake and eating it too. I meant to do bad, but I really didn't do bad, and kind of walking both lines. I didn't love that in the narrative, but overall it was a pretty good mitigation package, and frankly, had a very well-written sentencing memorandum. So what was the issue? Why a sentence of 8 years? Well, on that first call with this physician, I asked him how long he had engaged in criminal conduct. And he said, well, I'm a first-time nonviolent offender. I said, I understand. It's the first time you've ever been arrested, first time you've ever been involved in the criminal justice system. But how long does the government say your scheme, how long did it go on for? And he said, almost 9 years. Okay. And that was the biggest challenge to overcome. See, a number of defendants, their crime may take place for like just a little snippet, just a little part of their life. So I have an insider trading client right now, our team does. He did one deal, broke the law. I don't know if he's going to go to prison, but he pled guilty to a federal crime. But it was one insider trading transaction. I have a client who's part of a political case who engaged in some bribery, broke the law, pled guilty, may go to prison. But over the course of a 25-year career, it was a 4-month window where he made some bad decisions. So certainly at sentencing, sorry about all the text messages, it's busy. Certainly at sentencing, when you've engaged in something for 4 months or 6 months or even a year, like in my case, it was just over a year, it's easier to argue to a judge that the conduct, some would say, is aberrational or out of character, and it isn't a part of the defendant's overall life. Otherwise, he's led a very distinguished life other than this snippet. But in this case, it's really hard to argue that it's out of character. If anything, you could argue, and I discussed this with the defendant, well, is it in your character to break the law? You engaged in criminal conduct over a 9-year period of time. Is it really appropriate for your lawyers to argue that it's out of character, or is it in your character? And he said, Justin, no one's ever asked me that before. I said, well, maybe a tough question, but in retrospect, there are some things you could have done differently. And in our experience of interviewing judges, and I've had the privilege, along with my colleague, of speaking on stage with judges, they value authenticity. The story would have been better told had he said, when I began my career as a physician, I certainly didn't have intent to break the law and defraud Medicare to advance my own interests. Of course, very few people wake with the intentions to break the law. So he could have argued that. But certainly after he began to break the law for the first time, he didn't stop. He acknowledged it, got away with it, rationalized that it was okay, rationalized that others were doing it, rationalized that the government's the biggest crooks of all who squanders more tax dollars than, we get it. It very much became his character, he acknowledged to me, to cheat, where it got to the point where he didn't even think anything was wrong with it. So perhaps leading into sentencing, rather than taking the approach that it was out of character and a nonviolent first-time offender who's otherwise led a distinguished life, I think it would have helped him had he been more authentic and walked the judge through how it began and how he continued to go down that slippery slope for a very long period of time, and in time did not think there was anything wrong with it. So as a defendant, you have to understand or consider what judges consider when they sentence. What are things they take into consideration? Did I just say that twice? I'm live today. Work with me. Judges certainly need to consider, they want to know, are they going to deter criminal conduct? So if they sentence you to prison and actually put you in prison, does that will deter you from breaking the law? That's one thing judges consider at sentencing. Now, I've had a number of clients at sentencing, the judge will say, there is really no need for specific deterrence here. In other words, I don't need this guy in jail because I know he's not going to continue to break the law. It's more of the general deterrence, right? Letting others know the consequence of cheating. So that's one thing they consider, the need to deter criminal conduct. Another thing, of course, is the severity of the crime. Nonviolent first-time offenders tend to get better outcomes in part because they have not led a life of crime. And most of the time, it isn't out of character choice that they've made. Of course, something the judges consider is the protecting of the public. And of course, judges want to make sure they want to avoid unwarranted sentencing disparities among similar defendants. Okay, so that's the guidelines matter, but they're going to look at all cases and form an understanding. Of course, some judges are more severe than others. I was always told I had a very difficult and tough sentencing judge, Judge Stephen Wilson in Los Angeles. So let's come back to the biggest challenge defendants have to overcome if you've engaged in crime for a sustained period of time. If you cannot argue that it was simply out of character over a few period of months, but rather over, again, I will say it, a sustained period of time, what do you do? And that comes back to what this defendant did not do. He had beautifully written letters, a decent narrative, good lawyers he paid north of $500,000 to. But let me tell you what he did not do. He did not work to begin to create a record as a law-abiding citizen. So if any of you have watched the lengthy 90-minute video with Dr. Phil, if you don't have time to watch the whole 90-minute, if it's important enough to you, you'll watch it. If you want to apply lessons learned in that video, you'll watch it. But let's just say you don't have time and you just want to watch the 5-minute snippet with Dr. Phil, where I discuss the 4 sentencing points: identifying with victims, expressing remorse, lessons learned, and why you'll never return to another courtroom. You should watch that video because those points are crucial, specifically with respect to this biggest challenge to overcome, never returning to another courtroom. This defendant, this physician who was sentenced to just under 9 years, chose not to work while fighting his case. And how many of you watching this, if you're under investigation, if you've lost your career, as I did, if you've embarrassed your family, as I did, who find it may be hard to muster the strength to pick up the phone to call someone and look for work, how many of you could be working, but you are not working? How many of you rationalize, I'm not going to make enough money. I'll wait for my case to play out. I have enough money in the bank. I don't need to work today. I'm going to wait to see how things unfold. A lot of defendants do that. I did that for a little while. And part of the reason this defendant got punished at sentencing was because his case went on for more than 2.5, nearly 3 years. White-collar crime cases can really take some time to play out. So over this 3-year period of time, because he had enough resources left, he didn't have to work. So what was he doing? We're fighting his case. He stayed physically fit. A lot of defendants put on a lot of weight. He said he exercises 5-6 days a week, and he's late 50s, early 60s. So he's got kids and grandkids. So he was active, but he didn't find the time to work. Didn't think he needed to. And I will tell you why I think that is so crucial to all of you as you look to overcome the biggest challenge at a sentencing hearing, especially if your conduct went on for a sustained period of time. You've got to work because you've got to begin to create a record as a law-abiding citizen. You've got to convey to a judge that you can earn a living lawfully as a contributing citizen paying taxes. Every day that you work lawfully gets you further away from the conduct. So imagine if this physician had worked for the prior 2.5, 3 years. I think it would have made a big deal. Imagine if he worked and obtained letters, of which there were no letters from an employer or even a former employer, attesting to his hard work and ethics and recognition that he had made bad choices previously and he learned from them and he has now had a stellar record. So if the biggest challenge, in my experience, to overcome as a defendant is engaging in conduct over a sustained period of time, it would seem logical, to me at least, as someone who's written and studied on white-collar crime for more than 12 years, both as a prisoner, writer, and now federal prison consultant and speaker, national speaker on the subject, it would make sense then that you want to try to take words out of the judge's mouth at sentencing. Did any of you see the Eminem movie 8 Mile? If not, you should. At the end, there's this rap battle where Eminem essentially takes all of the words out of his competitor's hands, right? He says, "You did sleep with my girl. I am white trash," all of that. He addresses all of these concerns while rapping. His competitor takes the mic and drops it. Well, to a degree, as a defendant, to the extent that you can begin to think about what the judge is going to say and address them like, you engaged in criminal conduct for 9 years. It is very much your character to break the law. You're just so conditioned to cheating, you don't see it. If that's going to be in a prosecutor or judge's mind, I'm yelling, but I'm home alone while the kids are out swimming. If you know the prosecutor or judge may say that, logic would say to you, I've got to work to create a new record. I got to take that argument out of the judge's mouth because that could compel the judge to not deter me from breaking the law by sending me to prison. Can you understand that? Does that make sense to you? So what's the rational takeaway for all of you watching this video? I believe if you've engaged in criminal conduct probably north of a year, you can expect the prosecution to hammer that, to try to destroy your lawyer's argument that your conduct was aberrational. You were swept in perhaps by someone who exploited you or took advantage of you and you didn't know that it was wrong. When you knew that it was wrong, how long did you continue to do it? These are questions you've got to address, and you've got to be authentic. It's not enough to say I'm a first-time nonviolent offender. If a judge sees sustained criminal conduct over a long period of time, you know what they're going to call you? Not an executive, educated physician. They're going to call you a criminal who breaks the law and didn't seek to make amends by working to demonstrate that you're worthy of a second chance. And when I shared these thoughts with the defendant, I asked him, I said, may I speak openly to you? And he said, well, why do you ask that? I said, well, I always want to speak openly, but you're asking my advice. And I'm going to share some things with you that you may not want to hear because we can't change the past. And if we could change the past, we wouldn't be on this call right now. He said, no, I want to hear everything. I want to know what I could have done better. I want to know what I could do better moving forward because maybe I want to go in front of that judge someday and try to get off probation early. I want to learn. I want to know what I could have done differently. And I shared with him and I share with all of you. And that's how I'm going to wrap up this video, June 18th. The biggest challenge to overcome if you're facing a federal sentencing is conveying to the judge that you're worthy of a second chance, not just through words, but by deeds. And that includes working and demonstrating. In a free course that we give away at letterstojudge.com, I break through all of my character reference letters. I'm going to wrap up here like in a minute, I promise. I break down all of my character reference letters. I had 16 letters. I turned in 6. Now, Judge Wilson discussed all of these letters at my sentencing. Guess which one he spoke about first? The letter from the broker at the real estate office where I sold real estate. Think about that. Of all the letters I had turned in, philanthropic work, community service, friends, I didn't turn in any family letters. The first letter he spoke to was a letter from my broker where I sold real estate, attesting to the fact that I disclosed my crime, that I was working lawfully, ethically, that I was a great agent in that office. And then the second letter he read was from a client of mine in the real estate when I was selling real estate. And the client wrote that I gave him advice that cost me a $75,000 commission. I needed the 75 grand. I had lawyers to pay, restitution to save up for, but it was in the interest of my client to give him advice. And he wrote in the letter, signed it, cost Justin $75,000, but it was in my best interest. He's a good agent, ethical. Those sorts of letters demonstrated that I was moving past my criminal conduct at UBS, that I was working to create a new record, that I was introspective and learning from mistakes that I had made. Had this doctor done that and worked over the last 2.5 years rather than shut it down because he still had enough money in the bank not to work? I'm not a psychic. I don't know if things would have been different, but I know he wouldn't spend the coming weeks and months potentially in regret. over what's happened. Our team is going to prepare this physician for prison, ensure that he makes the most of the experience, ensures that he's prepared to thrive from the moment he steps into that community of felons, and does not let his sentence define the rest of his life. Hope all of you found value in this video. Thank you for your attention and time. I look forward to returning soon with more valuable content. And again, thank you so much for your attention. Back soon. Bye-bye.